Hello friends, I'm reading an open letter to the president of George Mason University, Professor Gregory Washington. In the footsteps of George Mason, the first dissenter. Calling on President Gregory Washington to protect heterodox science against the bullies cloaking under the guise of scientific consensus. President Professor Gregory Washington, President of George Mason University. My name is Sosan Gad, and I'm a PhD student in Earth Systems and Geoinformation Science at George Mason. I read this to you as an open letter in response to your university-wide email laying out the new safety guidelines for returning to campus in fall 2021. I find myself in a quite difficult position after reading your email, left with no choice but to call for your help. You instructed George Mason University students and faculty to report status of COVID vaccination or exemption thereof. I fit one of these two categories, but I do not believe anyone is entitled to obtain this information. My health choices are a strictly private matter, and I am under no obligation to disclose or explain them to anyone. As your email is presented as a guideline, and I hope it is nothing else, I am not obliged to any particular action, nor is it possible to be exempt from an non-existent obligation. Professor Washington, I came to George Mason as a mid-career international development professional. Through my work, I had the honor of working with international and indigenous communities in America, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and West and East Asia. I met people whom I considered to be my greatest teachers in life. Some of those teachers were powerful individuals, some extremely humble. Their languages may be different, their traditions may at times collide, but they taught me one universal value: to hold sacred the sovereignty of the human being and the human body, a value that transcends borders, political affiliation, language, social status, and time. When I wanted to return to graduate school, I researched several options, looking at those laminated brochures with fancy swimming pools and impressive alumni networks. None of this carried any weight or influence on my decision. The reason I chose George Mason was because some of the most remarkable people I came across in my life graduated in Mason, and I noticed a peculiar trend about them. They all had one thing in common. When faced with political or professional challenges, they all stood their ground. They all stood up for their freedom of conscience against bullying and clout. I became very curious about what it was in the Mason community that crafted this very distinctive strength of character, which I find the basis of intellectual and scientific excellence. This was ultimately the selling point for me. George Mason offered me one thing that money cannot buy: strength of character in standing up to the bullies. At Mason, we may not have a spiderweb alumni network to save us when the going gets tough, but it is my perception that we do not fear standing alone. After all, our university is named after the first dissenter. I joined Mason because it is my perception that we do not entertain sloppy science, enabled by men in suits. We only entertain scientific rigor, responsibility, and integrity. It is also my perception that we do not perpetuate de facto unconstitutional laws masked as guidelines. We make every effort to protect heterodox scientific inquiry, which garners not collective trauma, but healthy, responsible, and independent life choices that are immune to sensationalism. At George Mason, we graduate as scientists, not scienteers. This is why I joined George Mason. I hope you agree that I made the right decision. I could have done myself a favor and not penned this letter. I could have chosen to be a wallflower and simply report on the injection status that applies to me. It's no pleasure to be trouble or to see trouble in these contentious times. Moreover, Professor, I am certain that you have considered the possibility that some students, faculty, or staff may report information that is only accurate at face value, in order to avoid the heavy price of getting noticed for the wrong reasons, like me today. But this is exactly why I must speak up. These small acts of complacency, surrendering a dash of self-respect here, trimming a couple of our own civil rights there, almost negligible accommodations, they cause a slow but sure decay of the heart. You may notice, Professor, from my accent that I am a first-generation immigrant to the United States. I come from a place of precious and proud heritage in Africa that dissipated like dust in the air because of just that, daily rituals of surrender into decay of the heart. I left my home and I came to the land of the free so that I never have to do this again. I will not make myself smaller to avoid the wrath of big people. I am here today and I have nowhere else to run. Professor Washington, you arrived at George Mason at a critical time. An historic responsibility is placed on your shoulders, and I am confident that the legacy of the moral courage of George Mason will continue to prevail. Professor Washington, I invite you and the Board of Visitors at large to revisit and reverse the decision to disclose vaccination status of George Mason University students, faculty, or staff, or to develop any special accommodation or any social, administrative, or digital marking based on such status, even if we as a university must walk alone in the footsteps of our first dissenter. Thank you, Professor Washington, and God bless your heart.